Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm going to start today's card with some clearly besotted spring blooms stamps, and I'm also using some dies from Lawn Fawn from the spring showers, I believe it is, and the hillside backdrop in landscape. And I'm also using some granny apple green, balmy blue, and smoky slate Stampin' Up! Ink to use them to blend. So if you have normal distress, you have non-distress dyeings, I'm going to show you how to make a blended background. And I had colored the stamped images using Mission Gold, Margello Mission Gold paints. I stamped a whole bunch of images and then sat one day and just painted them all in. So that's why they're already pre-painted, if you like. So I'm taking the backdrop die, and there is a piece that actually sort of cuts out to create another space, and I'm going to sort of temporarily stick this in place. I do change my mind because my Gemini tends to, which is a die cutting machine, electric die cutting machine, it tends to what's the word, like it tends to almost stretch the paper, so the piece you can see in there, it doesn't quite look like it's fitting in that gap. So at this point I can't remember if I do take this off. I couldn't remember if I actually decided to not use it that way. So I'm not going to ink it in the same way, but basically the piece that cuts out you can use as almost like an inlay piece, and you can create your sky with that and then keep all the edges white and then have the green hillsides. I'm going to do something a bit different here, so we're just going to see what happens because I did this a little while ago. So I have taped off the bit around the edge of the hills so that I can just use when I put ink on it's not going to go above that, and so I can just ink up the hillside area, and then I will go back and do the top part as the sky area. I believe, actually now I'm looking at it, I believe I did use that inlay piece, I just inked them separately. So this is using Stampin' Up! Ink, and it's a great ink for doing some ink blending. So if you have a lot of Stampin' Up! Inks, or you have a lot of Lawn Fawn inks, or any of those sort of dye inks that are not distress branded, just because distress is specific, it does a lot of funky stuff. So but I know not everybody has distress inks, you have a lot of other dye inks, and so I wanted to show that you can use your other dye inks for ink blending as well. So I'm going to take the balmy blue now and another blender brush. This is actually a makeup brush, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm taping off where I left off, if you like, with the green, and I'm going to just ink around those edges of the frame. Now I could leave the frame white, I could have sort of taped around there so that there was a white border around that, and I have done that in previous videos as well. And now I'm taking that inserted piece, or like inlay piece that cut out, and I'm using that to ink up separately. In the end it was better this way than what I'd originally planned, although the other way would work just fine. I just think this was going to work out better than I originally thought. So and it did. So it worked out well. But yeah, I don't know if you guys have that where your Gemini tends to almost like stretch the paper. So it's that blue sky piece doesn't quite fit in perfectly, which it would do in another type of die cutting machine that doesn't do that. So maybe these ones I need to cut on my Big Shot instead. But yeah, and then I'm going to take a smaller little makeup brush thing and some smoky slate just around the edge of the clouds. It's not to make them look grey like stormy clouds, it's just to make them sort of define them so that they stand out a bit more as white clouds. They're not it's not meant to like I say, make it look like a stormy environment. It's just to highlight them, so that you can use blue as well. I think I've said that before. You can use a blue ink if you know, if you didn't want to use a grey. And you can use markers, you can use pencils, you can use all sorts of things just to colour in some white cardstock, so that you're you know, so that you've got some colour on there if you don't have coloured cardstock. Obviously white cardstock for clouds makes sense, but maybe for your backdrops and things like that. And this is where I love having ink to blend on and to create with. So this wasn't watercolour paper, but I, as usual, spritzed it with some water just to give it some texture in the background. It seemed to work okay, so that was good. Oh, and the mat that I'm on is a waffle flower mat that I've had for a few years now, and I actually really love it. Sometimes my camera goes a bit funny with it for some reason, but it's a great mat to work with, and it's, you know, it's heat proof and all that sort of fun stuff. Anyway, I'm waffling now. So I'm going to basically stick this flat to a A2 card, and I just grabbed a colour that of card base that I had in my stash already folded, that I thought looked or worked with the colour within the tulips, and then just a heavy block on top of it, just so that the wet glue can dry and hold it flat. So you will see, because of the stretch that it's got going on, there is a little bit of that pinky colour from the background, or from the card base, that's sticking through there, which I don't totally love, but it works enough for this card, and it actually worked with it, and it seemed to work okay. So I wasn't totally upset in the end about it, but you can see that it's slightly smaller. Have to say though, compared to when I first got my machine, this is not as bad as it was when I first got it. So it's maybe, you know, it's maybe settling in, shall we say. So with the clouds, I just decided where I wanted to put them, and I'm just sticking them on the edge there. I will cut off the bits that have gone over the edge of the card, but I'm just sticking everything flat for now. And then I'm just going to trim these off now. And then the tulips, I'm going to pop up with some dimensionals just to give a little bit of dimension, I know, and brings them out a bit in the forefront, because they are the main element on this card. So it makes sense for me to get them popped up, and that if I'd stuck them flat, they would have looked just fine, and they would have looked just as pretty. Also, in hindsight, if I knew what I was doing for this card before I started stamping and painting and all that sort of thing, sometimes I just stamp images out a few times and then sit in colour. If I'd had any forethought to this card, I would have probably done another 2 sets. I like odd numbers, so I probably would have done 5 instead of 3 lots of the tulips, and that way you'll see in a second that the field of tulips that I'm going with for this card would have looked a lot more full, and it would have just been that little bit better, I think. But I still love how it turned out. I think it's a very sweet little card. You know, this one says best of luck, and that's from the same stamp set that the tulips come from Clearly Besotted. Don't even think I said that, or did I? I think I did. Anyway, so I'm just popping them up in the front here, and it's kind of to look like there's tulips in this field, in the fields. So like I say, I think maybe a few more tulips would have looked a little nicer, a little fuller, but I still love how this turned out actually, and the colours work really nicely together, so I'm quite chuffed with it. And that's pretty much it. It's a very simple card. The colouring on the tulips themselves I actually experimented with while I was stamping and playing around with colour and that. So that's another thing to do, is if you want, just stamp out a bunch of images. Don't worry about what you're going to do with them, just stamp them out, sit in colour with whatever type of medium. In this case it was watercolours, and then just see what happens. This is what happened. So I hope you've enjoyed this, and I will see you in the next one, guys. Bye.